and youth activist here in Cork. She moved from India to Ireland 3 years ago and has been involved with Corla na Nog and Fridays for Future Cork. She has led 2 global climate strikes and represented these groups nationally. Recently selected as a youth representative for the Youth Climate Justice EU project at UCC, Akshita also gained experience working with MEP Grace O'Sullivan on the EU climate policies. We also have as our second youth panelist, Ersha Naheed, a 15-year-old TY student at St. Vincent's Secondary School, is an ICDL certified with a passion for reading, writing, and organizing community events, an active member of CDYS, The Hut, and she has also participated in various projects both in and out of school, including Technovation, and enjoys engaging in healthy debates. We're both very lucky to have you guys, seriously. And our third member is Peter Medway from Community Climate Action Office with Cork City Council. And I'm going to be passing this panel on to my co-host Denise, who will be in charge of the questions. Please enjoy, everyone. This is going to be a great panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie, for that fabulous introduction, and thanks, Aoife and Niamh, for really great inputs and very inspiring. I've already signed up to Aoife's circulation and network list. I'm really excited to keep track of that progress. And it's absolutely inspiring to see, Niamh, that you're involved in a biodiversity advocacy group. I'd love to connect in with you on that as well. So thank you both for that. We're going to have a bit of a discussion now. We're a little bit ahead of time, so we've plenty of time. I'm going to start with you, Ersha, if that's okay. You're the youngest member of the panel, and I'd love to just hear your views on what you've heard today at the conference, and you know, maybe some thoughts you might have for a few moments to start with.
Yeah, so I'm just after writing everything down in like the past 5 minutes. So hi everyone, my name's Ersha. I just want to say thank you to everyone for having me here. This is not really, but kind of my first time doing something like really, really big climate related. So first of all, I just want to start by saying like how happy and disappointed I am. Because first of all, it's the fact that we can all come here, sit down and talk about an issue that we all relate to. But it's the fact that the issue's there. And that's really disappointing and upsetting for not just me, but for everyone. As Katie said earlier, it's the groups of people that are anti climate change the most that are being affected the least. It just kind of shows how unjust the world is. And like there's only so much we can do. And we have to take it a step further by bringing the government into this. Like this topic should be brought into place like the Dáil or Seanad. And I think since the pandemic, the topic of climate change has just gone down like considerably, because I remember seeing it in the news a lot, and then the pandemic hit and I did not see it after that. I'm part of the younger generation, which are going to suffer, and if you think that they won't, they will, and if they're not, then they are. Ecosystems are suffering. We see it all the time. There's floods constantly. There was floods in Pakistan. That because my family's from there, I heard about that. My aunt was there. There was floods in Blackpool, I think, like 2 weeks ago. There was floods in Middleton, I think it was last year, the year before. My friend's brother was locked up in his house. We see things about the ice caps melting. I'll be walking through town and I'll see the river and I can actually visibly see the water level rising. I think that young people are the answer. Like Aoife Daly was saying earlier, that young people have been active in so many situations, but I don't think that the pressure should be put on just us. Obviously, this is a problem that everyone has to fix. And like I said, it's up to the government to help us. Like they can spend €9 million on phone pouches. I'm sorry, but when I saw that, like my jaw dropped. And there's homeless people sitting on the street. There's people who have houses but can't afford the bills. And it's so cold just because of how bad climate change are getting. And that's what they put their money towards. I just think that it's time that we demand that they help us solve the issue. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Ersha, thanks for that really impassioned response to this morning. We'll draw out a little bit more on that in a moment. You know, I can really feel your passion, and I have to say it's matching mine from this morning as well. So thanks for that initial feedback. Akshita, would you like to come in at this stage and maybe give a bit of your response to the morning, following on from Ersha.
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me here. And I have been a part of my school's Green Schools Committee for a long time, and I have watched these conferences every year. And I'm really, really glad to be here as a speaker today. Um, from what I've heard throughout the conferences, something that is the whole theme of this conference. It's about advocacy. It's about standing up for your own rights. It's about child rights. It's about environmental rights. It's about climate rights. It's about human rights. Because uh, climate justice and climate rights are not just for the environment. It is also a human right that so many people are denied in the world today. And it's something that we can talk about on this conference. But a lot of people do not even have basic access to basic resources. And they are not able to advocate these issues to the right people at the right time. And for many people, it has been too late because they haven't have the same opportunities as many of us today. And from what I've seen, and as a part of IFA Daily's project on post-paternalism theory, I wholeheartedly believe in that because I have seen myself progress a lot because in India, there is no such thing as a youth climate committee or a youth committee in general that interacts with adults or politicians or any decision maker. So there is no such thing existing at all. We know the rights, but there's no platform for us to advocate for that. But when I moved to Ireland, I joined Corlin and Oak. I became the Cork City representative at national level. I joined Fridays for Future. And that's how I was able to lead two strikes and eventually have this platform created that I could have and give an opinion on something. And that wave is very, very good, but it's also a very bad indicator of how desperate the situation is. And we in this conference have been saying the same thing. And it needs to hear and it needs to bang the doors of those people who are actual decision makers in this and solving this crisis. And as an aspiring person who wants to go into the field of law, I really think that our voices can be such big weapons against this crisis, but it needs to be done fast. And the burden is on young people, but intergenerational interaction is really important to solve it because it's not just young people and adults working separately. It's about interacting and being understanding and actually listening to what both generations have to say. And yeah, that's so far.
Thank you, Akshita. Very well said again, and very well articulated. And you brought to my mind an incident where I was in a European forum where some politicians were talking to a young person and talked about future generations, and the young person pulled them up and said, "We're not future generations, we're here now, we're here today." And I felt it was a very powerful intervention because there is a tendency to think of young people as the future and not the present. So thanks for bringing us back to that realization. Maria, you know, your work is very active. You're very out there in communities. You're connecting with people. You're probably the most action-focused person I've ever worked with. At these conferences and at many conferences, there's a lot of talk and a lot of, you know, I suppose, theory and views and perceptions. But we really want to talk about action here today. Like, what's your sense of this morning's discussion, and maybe just in terms of your own work and connecting it to action in some way? Could you just give us some views on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Akshita and Ersha. Very lovely things that you've said. They're really important things. And just on one of them, I think like we need to provide more platforms and opportunities for this kind of intergenerational, not just conversation, but also a platform for action where we can work together. what was really striking this morning was all the ideas that came up on the whiteboards about what we can do. It's the thing of getting out and doing them now. And I just want to say a big thank you as well to Nahill Community College. Like they've accomplished an awful lot in the space of about 1 year. And I think what they did can be emulated by other schools quite easily. I mean, it's such an easy thing to go out and plant a tree. Anybody can do it. You can do it in 5 minutes, but we're not planting enough of them. And like we were speaking earlier, John Barry was talking about technology and how some people are putting all their faith in this technology that's going to come out of somewhere that's going to solve all our problems. But like one of the greatest technologies of all is the humble tree and tree planting. So we can all get out and do an awful lot more around that. Yeah, I think. I used to love the Fridays for Future, the marches in Cork, and that seems to have subsided. And I don't think we should ever underestimate the power of those marches. They were absolutely inspirational. And I'm wondering if we can make a call, today for those to come back on our streets and re-energize all of us. Because they were an opportunity not just for young people, but for those of us who are older in the community to join and take heart and meet with young people. The other thing that occurs to me was that great opportunity for young people when they took over the Dáil in Dublin a couple of years ago. What came out of that day was absolutely amazing, and I do wonder what happened to all of their recommendations. That was the young people of Ireland. I think they were aged from 8 to about 18. Took over the Dáil and debated climate change and climate action and came up with superb recommendations. It'd be interesting to follow that up and see where they got and if any of them were taken up by government. So yeah, I guess there's an awful lot that we can do in our own homes, in our own schools. Certainly the green committees are great, and I'd urge all of you to get very active in your green committees. If you're not already part of one, because, with a lot of school grounds, there's so many things you can do. Like so many schools now are planting trees, they're starting tree nurseries, they're growing food, they're learning how to cook with the food. And a lot of people are bringing those very same things home into their houses. So yeah, I would hope that we might circulate all the ideas that came out of today, because there was a lot of ideas that I wasn't familiar with, like the whole thing about fast fashion and repairing clothing and all of that. There was a lot of input today, I think, by young people on that. So maybe we can consider circulating those notes.
Thanks, Maria. That's fantastic. And we will talk a little bit more about some of those ideas in just a moment. Peter, welcome. I know you're very tied up this morning and you haven't had the opportunity to be here for the whole morning, but this morning we had a really impassioned presentation from a number of key speakers. Salome came in from Malawi, and she showed us images and videos and spoke from the heart about the impact the climate is having on her country and on the communities of Malawi, where 81% I think of the economy is dependent on agriculture, but their agriculture is being destroyed by floods, cyclones, and drought, and it was very stark. And then John Barry came in, Professor John Barry from Queen's University came in, and I think he gave a very impassioned call to action. But he quoted somebody, I didn't catch who it was, saying, "Ask not what we can do for climate action, but what climate action can do for us." So he sees this as an opportunity, which I think is, an opportunity for changing how we are. So there's 3 ways he suggested. One is education, and I've taken this because I think it's a lovely framework. One is education. I think we've done a lot around education with this conference for the last 4 years, a lot around telling people what's there. To me, the research is all out there. There's so much investment in research. We kind of know what we need to do. The next phase is advocate. And there are, as you can see here today, loads of young people and adults doing really good work around advocacy. And then the third one is to organise. Now, I think Cork City Council have been inspirational. I'm not a staff member of Cork City Council, but what I do see is a commitment from the city to carbon neutrality by 2030. We're an EU mission city. We're aiming and we're striving and we're pushing the boundaries. And in a way, we're leading, in terms of climate action. It's not an easy task for somebody like yourself, but we'd love to hear, I think, from you, how is that going? What's your vision? Where is this all going? And how can we as young and older people get involved to make that happen at city level?
Thanks, Denise, and hi everyone. Sorry I wasn't able to join the whole workshop, but I've just seen a kind of summary of some of the main talking points here and caught the end of Naheed Purcell's remarks as well. And I guess before I talk about our kind of push for net zero by 2030, just a couple of thoughts that occurred to me in regards to what I've learned about the conversation so far. And I personally think this kind of intergenerational tie-up is really important. And I think that when we talk about a kind of human rights basis for climate action, I think that notion of universality that applies to human rights is critical here, that we're all in this, young, old, black, white, male, female, etc., is absolutely critical concepts that too often the kind of the interests that we seek to move and to influence in our society and our economy are quite effective at dividing and kind of bisecting interest groups. And I think the human rights argument of universality and that we're all in this and we're all affected, albeit in different ways, is a really important thing that should pull our kind of interests and movement together. And so this is a very helpful discussion in that. Not only that, but there is a question as to what do we as a society have to learn from the experience of older people and people who've gone before us. And one of the things that I reflect on quite a lot is that the changes that we're talking about trying to make in our society and our economy are in some respects kind of winding the clocks of our lives back to how people lived 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago in terms of their self-sufficiency in growing food, in mending things and extracting the maximum lifespan out of the things that they buy, about consuming less, and things like that. These were the experiences that, if not me in my mid-50s, definitely my parents and maybe my older siblings, probably the same for Denise and Maria and some of the other older people here, that the changes we're talking about are only going to do things that we used to do or that our families used to do. And so it's not kind of rocket science. It's not unfamiliar. And I think, okay, as a middle-aged man, I look back on my past with rose-tinted nostalgia, as anyone does. But I think that the data would probably back this up, definitely anecdotally, that when you talk to people of my kind of generation, we'd look back and think, our lives in those periods weren't anything less than they are now. We didn't have less fun than you guys might have done. We probably didn't have less opportunity than you all have today, although some things are obviously different, like foreign travel and frankly the sheer amount of consumption that individuals do right now. And so we need to look at what was good in that experience of life before, and that was fundamentally more sustainable and less kind of environmentally harmful, and you know, take the fear out of those changes in people's minds. So it's just a general kind of reflection on this intergenerational side of the discussion that you've had today. In regards to the push for net zero by 2030, this is obviously a extremely ambitious, transformational objective for the city, that if we get even close to it, has profound implications for how we live, how we move, what our work looks like, what our kind of fun looks like, the physical nature of our city, and everything would be transformed by this change. But when we look at the vision that we are trying to achieve through this, what we're talking about is not focusing on the reduction in greenhouse gases, important though it is talking about how we want to transform our city into the healthiest, most economically vibrant, most pleasant place to live, work, and do business in the country, if not beyond the boundaries of the country. And so the way that I see this is it's an opportunity for everyone in this city, that if we get to grips with it, if we make the necessary investments, then we all stand to benefit, and not just in terms of environmental sustainability and doing our bit for the climate crisis, but in terms of how we will have more and better paid job opportunities, better levels of education, less inequality, and those kind of better housing, more efficient, more cost-effective ways to get around the city, and so on and so forth. There's a win for everyone in that. And look, I don't underestimate the challenges that exist in doing that, and I very much see the leadership needs to be more effective, and we need to have collectively less excuses for why we can't change this or we can't change that. We all need to be bold in this. And with that in mind, we've established a leadership group for this transition that's bringing in the big public sector institutions in town, the two universities, the Irish Rail and the Bus Éireann, and the Cork Chamber of Commerce and the Cork Business Association and the Construction Industry Federation, and so on and so forth. And also the Call and Nogue, because we've said throughout our documentation on this transition that it has to be fair, that it has to be inclusive, and all of that stuff. And so, and of course, these are articles of faith in public policy, that, you know, we take everyone along for the ride and everyone's voice matters, and so on and so forth. But when we looked around the table in our first meeting, what did we see? We were looking in the mirror. It was all people like me, middle-aged white men mainly, a couple of women, but no representation for young people or for other kind of communities that are different from people like me, and so asking Call and Nogue to come in and join us in that event, and Akshita and a couple of others have been to one meeting of this leadership group so far, is our first step in terms of recognizing that this transition won't be achieved unless we can put everyone's shoulder to the wheel, unless we can incorporate everyone's voices into shaping how we do it, who's involved in it, what are the priorities, how do we sequence these different activities so they work in the interests of the most people most of the time. And so I think that's to sort of tie that opportunity back to the kind of thrust of what I see the meeting talking about throughout the morning is, how do you make that opportunity to advocate and influence count? How do you through participation in that group, which we hope will be taking a very forward leaning role in driving this transition forward, how do you make that count? And I guess it's not for me to tell you how to do it necessarily, but if I was to advise you, then it's important that for those few people who are participating in this structure to lead the transition, first of all, you've got to be able to represent the views of a wide cross section of your peers. And so there I'm thinking that Caller is the one with its foot in the door, but you're there as spokespeople for all the young people in town. And so I'm wondering how you can, and I appreciate we may need to help you with finances, with convening, and so on and so forth. But how can we help you to make sure that when you're at those meetings, you're not just representing Akshita, Gupta, or Ersha, or yourselves as individuals, or even your tight circle of friends, but that you've got evidence to draw on. The things that you contribute to the debate reflect the widest possible set of views of your peers. And that's something that we need to talk about as to what we can do with you to help you kind of achieve that kind of weight to your advocacy. And I think the other side of it is information and encouragement and enthusiasm and potentially resources going in the other direction. That we'll be having discussions and having making decisions about how do we tackle the emissions from the built environment, our houses, our businesses, our industries that are in the city, or how are we going to deal with the transport service and all of that kind of thing. And it's there that we need you to be a kind of mouthpiece to other young people in the city to communicate out to them what's happening, what's working in this process. And that will help you, I think, with that point that Denise made about the organization, because you can then start to organize yourselves to put your weight onto kind of pressure points that will have more of a chance to leverage change. I was very pleased to join in the last climate strike that happened earlier this year, but it's not focused enough to kind of really influence change in what we're actually doing to deliver the transition. Sorry, I've talked too much, but I'd say this is a great opportunity for young people, and I hope you can make the most of it.
Okay, thanks for that, Peter. I think you've raised a few things there around leadership, and I suppose it's to put it back to maybe a question for both Ersha and Akshita in terms of leadership. Sometimes we think we've to wait for politicians or, that they're leading. Do you think that that leadership can come from other levels in this fight for climate justice? And have you seen leadership at other levels that maybe you could share with us, or inspirational people who've led at a different level beyond just political? Maybe you, or even Maria, anyone who might have some views on that.
I think that leadership, it's not about like your age or what experience you have or anything. It's about what you know and how much you actually want to make a difference. Like, to me, it's like if my 10-year-old brother woke up and he was like, climate change is bad. I want to make a difference, and he has ideas to do it, and he wants to do it. He can do it. Do you get me? So I don't
Yeah.
think that it's like about waiting for politicians. I think it's just that the system that we have now, obviously democracy is a very fair system, but it's just that the people who are up there are showing little attention towards the problems that we have. So I think it's either that someone else steps up, or it's that we force them to listen.
Agreed. Akshita, would you have any kind of experience in this domain?
I would refer back to the thing that was brought up in the conference about tokenism of young people. And being a part of Corla for 3 years now, I have experienced this, if I'm going to be honest, in some events, yes, because it's about the face of young people in social media that, yes, the government of Ireland is doing this, and they have this percentage of young people in their committee. But it's eventually it becomes more about your face than your voice, and the decisions are made, but your influence isn't that big. And I've experienced this firsthand, so I can say that very confidently. But if it's about leadership, like true leadership of young people, it needs genuine, honest listening and interaction. Because, as Peter said, that he was in the last climate strike that we did, and I was leading that strike, and it was a very bad day in Cork. It was orange weather only, I clearly remember it. But it was really impactful because it was not just young people who attended the strike this time. It was a lot of political activists and Peter himself and a lot of other people. And MEP Grace O'Sullivan's party workers were also there. And it was really good to network there. And that's how I actually got to know Peter and the city council's work on climate change. And that's how our collaboration eventually started. Because leadership is just not about, like writing papers or giving letters and giving speeches. It can also be through different forms where you are collectively as a group have an aim and are working towards it. And that can be in so many forms, like the Green Schools Committee, for example, building a greenhouse in their school. That's a form of leadership. And that should be encouraged at all levels. And politicians, yes, bureaucrats, yes, they are really important while making a holistic change in the country. But little steps, like Ersha said, like any 10-year-old, 12-year-old who's a little aware about climate change should have the confidence and should be encouraged to take action in the smallest possible. And that's how we build up our knowledge eventually about this very bleak future about of ours, but we can still do at many levels about it. And I, as a youth activist, can say that yes, I have been a victim of tokenism, but
Yeah.
I also know that I have affected change in a lot of ways, even if they're small. And they have really helped me to decide what I want to do in the future as well.
Thanks, Akshita. I agree. I've been a victim of tokenism myself. I'd say there's not a person on this online right now that hasn't been in some form or another. And there's nothing worse and nothing more demoralizing. But what I do is I use that feeling to kind of activate myself into action and to really, I suppose, get cross. And I could really relate to what John Barry was saying about those different emotions that you go through probably every day in the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, that whole thing where you nearly become frozen in fear and then you get angry again and it activates you. And that tokenism is one of them. I suppose just to come in on that as well, before I ask the next question, like I know Donna's had to leave now, but there is a child-friendly city structure now in the city that is very much about activating and putting the voice of children, that is children under 18, very much at the heart of city development and city planning. So it's not just a love your line about your face, but your voice, and your voice is very, very crucial. So there's a lot going on in that space parallel to all of this. And I no longer see climate as a topic. I see it as integrated into everything that we're all doing. Maria, I suppose just again to come back to the whole leadership thing and communities and activating, certainly, you know, and I guess also back into that whole thing of, you know, that climate isn't a topic so much anymore, but it's weaved into everything. You see a bit of that in terms of the work that you're doing at community level with community growing and with the schools. I mean, the work going on in Nagle was so inspirational, and last year we had fabulous video from Naheed. Like, schools are doing incredible things. There's fabulously active green schools out there. Do you want to share a little bit about, you know, I suppose the energy that comes out of that and where that's all going as well, maybe?
Yeah, I suppose we should never underestimate all the small actions that are happening across our city. And there are heroes everywhere, actually, quietly doing their work. We tend to sometimes forget about that. And when it comes to leadership and action, you know, we need it at all levels, grassroots, in the middle, and, you know, higher up. But never wait around for anybody is what I'd say. Just go out and do. And like everybody knows what to do now. There's so many things to do, and it's a wonderful way of assuaging, I think, the grief that we probably all share for what's happening and the fear. It's just a great antidote to get out and do things, not just on your own, but with people. And one of the greatest things I've witnessed since I started this work with Green Spaces is the building of community. I remember in 2019 when I started the work first, I frequently said, "Where is community? How do we kind of bring people together to do things?" Because at times it seemed like I was working on my own in a vacuum, and it was a lonely place to be, really, and just really hard to get people motivated. And like, we shouldn't underestimate what has happened in the interim, how things have changed hugely. There's been a sea change. And now I think so many people are engaged. It's impossible, actually, not to be engaged. And that's very heartening. That gives me fierce hope. I'm really heartened as well at the idea of like turning this awful crisis around to make it so that we can look forward to a better life. I mean, who wants to be living in this capitalistic rat race where, you know, individualism has been sort of completely thrust upon us to the cost of sharing and of that connection with community that we so need, that we've lived in for ever since Homo sapiens kind of evolved on Earth. We need community, we need each other, we need people. And if it brings us back to that, I have great hope. And that seems to be the direction that it's going on. And that seems to be, well, that is what I'm witnessing on the ground. You know, the community gardens are just one little piece of this movement all across the city. And the average age of the community garden that I'm most involved with now is 40. Our youngest is 6, our eldest is 82, and it's just wonderful to have that intergenerational experience week in, week out. And people are kind of getting to know again people in their neighbourhoods. They're getting to talk to one another. They're getting to hear one another's stories. You know, for a long time we didn't have that. So I'm very hopeful for the future and how it's going to change for the better. I'm looking forward to a society where we're not dominated by capitalism and endless growth. I'm looking forward to a society where I feel secure and happy, and I can talk and communicate with people, and I can feel safe.
Fantastic. That's a lovely way to finish the discussion here in the panel. And I know that at one of our first intergenerational climate conferences, which was in person, President Michael D. Higgins attended, and that was exactly what he called for 4 or 5 years ago, where he called for this concept of constant growth. He challenged economists to come up with an alternative. It's just not good enough anymore, and maybe that's the premise under which we can advocate.